Okay, good morning, and thank you so much. We're going to start with a brief video from our Executive Director, Dr. Joshua Thomas. Once I am able to pull that up.
Good morning and welcome to the training. I'm Josh Thomas, CEO and Executive Director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Delaware, or NAMI Delaware. First of all, I want to say thank you for attending this training and thank you for what you do every day. You have a very important role in our first response to crisis, and we are so grateful for you spending some time with us to learn more about CIT today. I was a law enforcement officer for 25 years prior to my role with NAMI. I have coordinated and directed CIT training for 15 years between my career in Florida as a law enforcement officer and my current role with NAMI. Many years ago when I went to the academy, there was no mention of mental health or mental illness. I was not prepared to deal with mental health crisis encounters when I left the academy. I did have to capture a live alligator in order to graduate from the academy. After all, it was Florida. However, as you can imagine, I never had to capture a live alligator in my 25-year career. However, I did have to deal with mental health crises on many, many occasions. In fact, I started realizing just how common the root of what we were dealing with in a crisis situation was a mental health crisis. CIT began in Tennessee in 1988. This followed a deadly force encounter in 1987 between a man with schizophrenia and Memphis officers. A community outcry led to the Memphis Police Department partnering with NAMI, our national organization, and the University of Memphis to develop what has become known as the Memphis model of CIT training. In 2014, CIT began in Delaware, and since that time, we've trained over 500 law enforcement officers statewide. It's really important that you participate in today's training because you are a critical part of the response to people in crisis in our community. The Crisis Intervention Team is a diverse group of stakeholders in our community. Police officers, communications professionals like yourselves, mental health professionals and other healthcare resources, our hospitals, the courts, loved ones of people living with mental illness, and people living with mental illness themselves. If we're all working together to resolve these crises, we're going to have much better outcomes. Our goal with the Crisis Intervention Team program is to increase the safety of everyone, every officer, every person in crisis, and all of the community members that may be exposed to that crisis situation. Our goals are to refer people to the appropriate mental health resources so they can get the care and treatment they need to better survive in our community and better navigate crisis situations. It's also really important that we divert people from the criminal justice system. That is not where someone needs to be if they're struggling with their mental illness. And another goal is for us to have less use of force in these crisis situations and therefore have less risk of people getting injured. Crisis Intervention Team training is 40 hours of training for law enforcement officers. Today you're going to hear about the various components of this training. The idea is to have officers voluntarily participate in this training. This isn't for officers who are voluntold to go to the training. This is so officers who have a heart for doing this and want to intervene in a mental health crisis more effectively get the tools and resources they need to do that. Officers that participate in the training should have a desire to get those new skills to resolve crises. And agencies should be empowering officers to be able to take the lead in a mental health crisis and be able to respond to these situations whenever possible. CIT is a specialist officer model. In other words, officers are trained to be specialists in resolving crisis situations. Therefore, it's absolutely critical that our communications personnel recognize early on in a call from a citizen or a person in crisis that it's potentially a mental health crisis, so that that can be communicated effectively to the officers in the field, and the correct officers that are trained to respond can get dispatched to that call. It is imperative that we all work together to resolve crisis. Therefore, we're going to be working on developing a special CIT class just for communications professionals like yourselves. It will probably not be 40 hours, but it will be exclusively tailored to the work that you do. We hope that you're going to be interested in taking that training when it's time for that training to be released. I want to once again say thank you so much for participating in this training today. You're going to be hearing from people very familiar with the CIT program, and all of us are more than happy to talk to you more about CIT and how you can get involved. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the training. All of us are more than happy to talk to you more about CIT and how you can get involved. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the training.
And our first speaker is Lieutenant Charles Sawchenko.
All right, I put my timer on for 10 minutes. Good morning, everybody. I'm Lieutenant Chuck Sawchenko with the Delaware State Police. I've been involved in CIT since its inception. I was on the original and continue to be on the CIT committee. We've had about 15 training sessions with law enforcement since that time. One of the things that I do, because of my background, I still am an MSW, but I used to be a practicing social worker prior to my law enforcement career, and have spent a lot of time dealing with people that suffer from a mental illness. I brought that experiences to law enforcement in terms of training, and one of the things that I do training in CIT program is on mental illness. And the mental illness awareness and communications training is now more than half the day on the very first day, that gives the officers a foundation of what mental illness is. The theory is that the more they understand about mental illness, the more that they can utilize their own skills and abilities to deal with that type of situation. One of the areas that we focus on is psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia, a thought disorder. We spend a lot of time going over schizophrenia. We have a lot of videos that we show, bipolar disorder, some on anxiety and personality disorders. Not only do we go over this, we point out different symptoms and behaviors to help recognize if you're dealing with someone who suffers from a mental illness. The other part is we introduce the calm, assess, facilitate strategy in terms of dealing with someone who has a mental illness and is in crisis. I like to utilize the word compromised thinking. If you can recognize that someone has compromised thinking or a thought process, what are some special techniques and strategies you need to use in order to de-escalate that person? So that is introduced. A lot of strategies are given to the officers at that time. Now, it's very important to remember that during this training, we are not asking officers to undermine their own safety. We are not taking tools away from police officers. We are adding tools to the toolbox that they can utilize when they're in that type of situation. The last research that I did, police in the state responded to over 4,700 situations that involve someone with a serious or persistent mental illness. We handle those situations extremely well. They can be pretty dangerous. Stats have shown that that population, though no more dangerous than the regular population, has a 4 times higher likelihood of some type of violence occurring in that situation. So doing this hopefully will result in less assaults, resisting arrests, and that we can get that person to the proper place for treatment. One of the other things that we tell police officers, and it's a kind of a funny story, is that we're not there to diagnose individuals. And one young trooper, after taking CIT, felt so confident that he put in his report that he was a trained CIT trooper and that this person was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia through his training. And we're not teaching people to do that in their reports or become mental health professionals. What we're teaching is that you can recognize it so you can handle it better and hand off that individual, facilitate that handoff to the correct facility or individual to handle that person. One of the other aspects of the training that I do in CIT program is looking at youth and elderly individuals. There's many times that we're responding to individuals that are elderly and training them on some of the medical conditions they can experience that can exhibit signs of mental illness when in fact it's another medical condition like a urinary tract infection. We have doctors that come down from Christiana Hospital that instruct the class on areas for the elderly that they might suffer from. We also have individuals coming for youth and talking about trauma. As you may know, there's initiative throughout the state and state agencies for all state agencies to understand trauma in youth and how that may affect their behavior. The theory is that the more the officer or the trainee or the student understands these things, the more they can use their own experiences and skills and education and knowledge and abilities to handle that situation in a better way. So understanding some of these diagnoses is very important. The last part that I do some training on is intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities and autism. As you may know, there have been some cases throughout the country where people have died at the hands of the police when they suffer from an intellectual disability. If you ever want to look up the case Ethan Saylor, we use that in our training in terms of what can you do different. One of the things that we're trying to focus on in terms of that training and all training is that the old model of you listen to the police officer, if you don't, you jump right on in, use force if you need to. That model may work well with some individuals, but may not work well with people with compromised thinking or individuals that have an intellectual disability. So if things are safe and you have contact and cover and time and distance, it's not an emergency, why rush in? Part of the other training focuses on legal aspects of not rushing in or creating your own exigency. If you've been on the job for a while there, you'll remember the days where we responded to a check on the welfare, and if someone didn't answer the door, we're going to kick in the door and confront a suicidal person with a knife. And it doesn't take much to realize that there have been many police-related shootings because of stuff like that. We're not always kicking in the door if someone is suicidal nowadays. So that kind of change is occurring within our state in our training. One of the other differences that we talk about is recognizing when someone has intellectual disability or autism, how they may think different, how they may behave different. When is it appropriate to intervene for a law enforcement officer, when it is not appropriate to intervene for a law enforcement officer. Special consideration is always given to those officers that work in schools that have those children that suffer from those disorders. There's always something that pops up where a 7-year-old is handcuffed, an autistic 7-year-old is handcuffed. Also, there's training in terms of some of these children who like to run and wander away and how to conduct a search and rescue. Water areas are very important for autistic kids as they're drawn to water, for example. The training, that I've been doing and the whole class has been doing for the last, since 2014, has had exceptional results. Troopers have sent me videos of encounters that they've had, that they use some of these strategies and techniques, that they took their time. They were able to take people into custody without having to fight them. And one Troop 9 trooper emailed me and says, it works. And so that's what we want to hear. We're hoping to bring CIT, and you'll hear from Captain Treadwell momentarily, into a more robust position where troop captains at DSP will know who's the CIT trooper, count on them to handle certain situations. Well, dispatch in the future will know who the CIT trained officers are, count on them to handle certain situations in the future, follow up if necessary, to make for a better response by all police officers in charge. And I'll be on to answer any questions after everybody completes their session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lieutenant Sawchenko. Our next speaker is Lieutenant Harold Bozeman.
Good morning. I'm Harold Bozeman from Wilmington Police. I'm a lieutenant there. Like Lieutenant Sawchenko, I've been involved with the CIT program since it came to Delaware, helping with the implementation and the instruction of it. With Wilmington, I've been a crisis negotiator and hostage negotiator for just over 12 years, so longer than I've even been involved in CIT. During our initial negotiator training and also in our continuing ed, we obviously had some instruction on mental health and how it might affect a negotiation. But the reality is that most hostage training focuses on communication skills and not necessarily on mental health analysis and evaluation. So I got involved with the crisis intervention team concept when it first came to Delaware. And since then, I've learned a lot about how important it is to consider how knowledge of mental health disorders and crises can really help a negotiator. CIT training really teaches the officers what to look for in recognizing mental health challenges and disorders, and how best to communicate with people who are experiencing different kinds of crisis. The class teaches officers the best way to communicate with people based on our assessment of what their specific disorder or their kind of crisis might be. So since I've been working with CIT, I've done some research, and I learned that in many places, they even make crisis intervention training a prerequisite for hostage negotiators. And I've really come to understand that it's really the right way to go. I believe that along with training about effective communications, officers should also be learning about the kinds of crises that can cause a person to barricade themselves or take a hostage. And in a lot of those cases, it's just to avoid arrest or capture, or because they have something they want to gain. But there are enough times that a mental health crisis is involved. And that's what makes the CIT training that much more valuable. One of the things I teach the CIT trainees is that no one who takes a hostage or barricades himself is in a healthy state of mind. So even if there's really no official diagnosis, to use Lieutenant Sawchenko's term, there's some sort of compromised thinking going on in that moment. And the tools from CIT help to prepare officers to deal with that in the best ways. Since we've been using CIT in Wilmington, just like Lieutenant Sawchenko said with the troopers, we've had some pretty good success stories. We've noticed that officers in the field, when they see that something is maybe mental health involved, they call for assistance, they call for the CIT officer that's on duty, and have them come out and sort of help them with communications and help them with the assessment. One of my favorite CIT success stories from Wilmington is about one of the officers on my platoon when she helped a veteran who was suicidal and in crisis. He was standing over the edge of a highway overpass, and he was threatening suicide. He was threatening to jump down about 30 feet into the oncoming traffic below on 95. He was on the outside of the safety fence, and our officers couldn't physically get to him. He was about 20 or 30 feet from them on the outskirts of the fence. The senior officer, it was a senior officer and a patrol trainee, an FTO trainee in the car. The senior officer was one of our CIT officers, graduates, and she immediately started talking to the man. She learned that he was a military veteran, and she used her CIT skills and her knowledge and started to de-escalate him and assess his state of mind. Turns out her trainee officer was also a veteran. So he joined the conversation and built some rapport with the man. And together they were able to convince the individual to back away from the ledge and sit on the ground where they were talking with them. They did eventually get him to climb back over to the safe side of the fence away from the highway. And they convinced him to accept a mental health evaluation. They drove him to the hospital for treatment. And that was last spring. And so that's just one of the many success stories we've seen with CIT actually being applied in the field, and it worked. And like Lieutenant Sawchenko said, in the past, that would have been, this man's non-compliant. We have to get to him physically as soon as possible, take him into custody, drive him to the hospital, maybe for an involuntary commitment, or, absent that, arrest him for trespassing on state property just to get him off the road. And CIT has given us so many more tools that we can use to resolve things like that. So we've made improvements in the way our healthcare partners handle police-involved crisis since the program started too. You all know from your experience in the communication centers that officers and troopers are stuck at an emergency room waiting for someone to take custody of a person in crisis more often than you'd like, sometimes for hours at a time, right? So the CIT training gives our officers and troopers the tools they need to better communicate with the medical staff, fill out the proper forms. And we've seen our ER waits shortened in most cases, and we have seen officers make good use of alternative facilities outside the hospitals like Ellendale and like Recovery Innovations in Newark, and they take people there for help instead. So the benefit to you all is that it helps keep the officers from being tied up for long hours and helps you in communications by not depleting the number of officers you have available for crisis. And I understand the perspective from both sides. I used to oversee our communications center at Wilcom. And so I had questions about CIT and about how to handle things all the time. And I know how frustrating it can be when our officers are tied up long-term on these situations. So I've kind of seen it from both sides of the fence. And that's why we've come to recognize that CIT is an important thing that we need to bring to communications professionals so that you all can see what's going on from our perspective and so what resources are available and that you can better evaluate and assess the mental health crisis calls when they come in through your phones. So I will be here for the rest of the session. I'll be available at the end to take questions with Lieutenant Sawchenko and the staff from NAMI. And I'll now turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you, Lieutenant Bozeman. Our next speaker is Sergeant Kristin Smith.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right, so I don't want to repeat myself, but basically I'm Kristin Smith from the Delaware State Police. I worked at Troop 4 in Georgetown, and I, as Harold has, been a hostage negotiator for about 9 years as well. Prior to being in law enforcement, I actually was a social worker / case manager dealing with people in corrections and mental health as well in New York State. So that kind of guided me with some of the stuff that I started doing in law enforcement. So with that being said, this class is very beneficial, not only for law enforcement, but in my opinion, dispatchers, because you guys are the lifeline for the police. And if you guys aren't on the same page as us and vice versa, sometimes that can be a bad day. So this class in general is just going to give you some more tools for you to be able to maybe ask some questions in a different manner that you normally do. Be able to have some insight in regards to maybe what is happening. A lot of times, we have frequent flyers that are always calling our 911 centers. And I'm sure that you as communication specialists may become frustrated at times and maybe not know what angle to take. Some of the tools and skills discussed at this class, some of the information that Lieutenant Sawchenko and Dr. Tavani talk about when they talk about specific mental health diagnoses are helpful. Again, we don't expect anyone, law enforcement or communication specialists, to be experts in the mental health field, but maybe just know that there's something happening, and that this person has some crisis situations frequently, infrequently, and then how are we going to best serve this individual? So in the long run, hopefully they're calling our 911 centers less. Law enforcement response has to be less. And the individuals who should be helping and providing service, the mental health agencies, mobile crisis, child priority response if it's children, those resources are given to the individual needing service, you know, even if it's ongoing after the call. So really, this is like an introduction for you. I'm sure some of you, I do teach the 2-day communication specialist class at the Delaware State Police Academy. So anyone who is a communication specialist in Delaware may have taken that class, and we hit on some of those points too. So I look forward to seeing what NAMI and CIT will be able to offer in conjunction and work together with them on that, because I think this will just bridge the gap of some of the things we might miss at the class we offer at the academy. I know that in the past, any communication specialist that's taken that class has said it's been beneficial to them. So I can only imagine that with the additional resources that NAMI and CIT are able to provide, this will just be some great tools for you. Again, I will be here if anyone has any questions. Through CIT, I teach the de-escalation portion. And again, just really talking about active listening skills, way to phrase questions a little differently to try to maintain that calm in a person while you have them on the phone. Because sometimes as communication specialists, you have to keep that person on the phone, or you hope to be able to keep that communication with that person until law enforcement is on scene. And sometimes that 5 or 10 minutes seems like eternity. And what are some of the things that you can look to talk to this person about to gauge and build that rapport with them? So those are some of the things that we also discuss at the class. We do live scenarios. Obviously for you guys, you would never be face-to-face, hands-on. So tweaking those scenarios to be able to handle them on the phone and how you're going to do that. And being able to utilize some of the resources within your communication center, having a coworker help you or a coach to guide you so you don't feel like you're just out there by yourself. So any questions, please let me know. Hopefully you can spread the word, and this is something that we can get off the ground and start running with it. Have a good day.
Thank you, Sergeant Smith. And now we have our final speaker, Captain John Treadwell. Captain Treadwell, you're muted.
Good morning, everyone. Wes, do you have the PowerPoint that you can share, or do you need me to share it?
I'll make you host so you can share it, or co-host so you can share it.
Okay.
Are you able to share it? Because I can pull it up really quick too, if you do not have a share screen button.
Yeah, it's not coming up right now for whatever reason. If you have it and the ability to share it, I would appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay, while we're waiting for the PowerPoint to come up, again, I'm Captain Treadwell with the Newcastle County Division of Police. As you heard from both Sergeant Smith and Lieutenant Bozeman, my origins in the crisis field also started as a negotiator in 2003. I became commander of the Newcastle County team in 2007, and I'm still an advisor to the team right now. So we very easily understand the impact of crisis and trauma and how it's all interrelated. And our ultimate goal is to keep our officers safe, as well as keep the citizens that are in crisis safe. As we know, you guys as call takers and dispatchers are truly a lifeline. And we think that doing this type of training for dispatchers statewide are going to increase our chances for success, both within the keeping the officers safe as well as the citizens in crisis safe. You can go to the next slide, please. Since 2015, we know that over a quarter of the people killed in interactions with the police have had a known mental illness. We know that many more are undiagnosed or untreated in terms of mental illness. And when we look at what's going on nationwide in terms of police accountability, racial justice, everything has been re-energized, and we have to see where we can change fundamentally while keeping everybody safe, because that's what the public is demanding of us. And the reality is we know mental health across this country is failing, period. And our state is no different. Next slide, please. A lot of people, they don't want police going to a lot of these crisis calls. And as law enforcement, you know, I've given it a lot of thought over the last couple of years. And we're fortunate here to have the behavioral health unit where we have the co-responder model, where we have 2 police officers assigned with 2 mental health professionals, and they can go to the 911 calls in crisis in real time. They have a higher level of mental health training as well as the civilian mental health professional with them. But the reality is there's not enough of them to go around. So we still have officers that are responding every single day to these calls. It goes against what we're trained as police officers. Normally we're told command and control because that's what saves our lives. When we're dealing with people that are irrational, when safe and feasible, which are the key words, sometimes the officers have to give some of that up. And that means we expect them to use cover, concealment, and not rush into things. We don't need them to diagnose people. We just need them to realize that the person's words, actions, and behaviors are not normal for a reasonable citizen. We as the police can't do it alone. It really is going to take the village approach. And all of that, again, starts with 2 men and women who take those original 911 calls. And we know that there's a certain criteria of questions that you have to ask to maintain your standards. And through developing this training, we need feedback to hear from you men and women on how we can tailor the CIT for dispatchers and call takers to fit your needs, because there may be additional questions that we need you to ask that are, again, going to help the officers on the back end recognize that this may be a person in crisis. Next slide, please. Again, just some of why this is so important. When we look at how many adults have severe mental illness, you can see 1 in 4, 1 in 5 that are in jail. And then of all our law enforcement responses, 1 in 10, again, with the majority either in denial or untreated or undiagnosed. Next slide. Here's some fast facts. In this time of a pandemic where we've seen the calls for crisis, both overdose and mental health, go up across this nation in dramatic fashion, 1 in 3 adults have reported struggling with anxiety and/or depression. Suicide, second leading cause of death among 10 to 34. I know right now within Newcastle County, our department last year, we're up 15 suicides during the pandemic time over the year prior. And as we can see, those that are lesbian, gay, or bisexual youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. When you combine that with the fact that for many of our youth, all of their social coping mechanisms and avenues in terms of schools, sports, and other stuff for more than a year were taken away from them. So our kids are struggling out there. Mental illness and substance abuse disorder, again, are involved in 1 of every 8 emergency department visits by a U.S. adult. Next slide, please. Here are some of the success stories we've had here at the county by engaging people with CIT, a reduced number of repeat calls. So you're saying, why is that important? Every time we have to go out to the same residence for some sort of crisis, usually it's at least 2 to 3 car response plus a supervisor. The more times that we go out, the higher likelihood there's going to be a use of force. So when we're able to reduce going back out to the same residence time after time, it makes it a success for everybody. Again, using CIT officers reduces the risk of injury to both the officer and the person in crisis. It allows for better accountability because our CIT officers get to know the providers. So if we're not having a certain provider do their part through the relationships we've developed, we can reach directly out to their higher ups and say, hey, look, we've had these documented problems. Something needs to be done to fix this. And we've been very successful in doing that. It also allows greater partnerships between departments in public safety and organizations like NAMI, which overall are going to lead to better outcomes for society. And this is also going to lay the foundation for our transition to the 988 system, which is coming this fall. Lastly, we're going to talk about just a few nuggets of feedback that we've gotten from past participants about the CIT training. Talk about all the scenarios are very realistic, and the student got to put to practice what they learned in the week leading up to the scenarios. They also talk about it's one of their favorite modules. They learned something from every scenario. Awesome scenarios, learned a lot of the new techniques and resources that were available, because again, you got to remember, back in the day, if law enforcement didn't know what to do with somebody in crisis or mental health, they tried to arrest their way out of the problem with a disorderly conduct charge or something else, and then the person was usually jailed and not getting the treatment that they needed and or deserved. Next slide. Couple more comments. Great hands-on learning overall, good information, eye-opening training, and the scenarios help learn and apply situations involving mental illness. Next slide. So overall, what we're asking you men and women to assist us in doing is just adding another layer to the life-saving work that each of you do every day, because you guys are the link between citizens when they dial that 911 number and you guys are asking police, fire, and ambulance. It's another layer. In order to truly make this successful, we need feedback. Right now, all the dispatchers go through the 5-day course. We realize how busy you guys are and the work that you do. So that's why we're hoping to develop a shorter course, possibly 2 days. But again, we truly need feedback, and maybe it'd be good for some of us on the CIT committee to come sit a day with you guys, both on the 911 call taker side, as well as the dispatcher side, just to learn even more of what you do, what your standards are, so we can make sure that this is going to truly be a fit for all of us. Because the one thing I can assure you is the public is calling for better training among law enforcement and dispatchers and call takers in regards to people in crisis. And I know for a fact that doing this is going to save lives on both sides of the equation. Thank you all very much for your time and attention this morning. Thanks, Wes.
Thank you, Captain Treadwell. And we have just about 15 minutes. So if to answer questions, if anybody has them, as I said, you can come off mute and ask them, or you can put them in the chat and we'll read them out. So there are no questions. I'm just trying to give people a chance in case they're typing. I know some people have different typing speeds. The one question is, will there be a continuing training available? So that is what we're trying to develop. We're like looking to kind of create sort of like a smaller, shorter version of CIT specifically for communications. So this is just kind of like an intro course, gauging interest, and also to let you guys know kind of more precisely what that may mean. Does anyone else want to add to that?
I think
Oh.
that's, oh, sorry. I think
Oh.
that's perfect, Wes, that we do want to gauge interest and, you know, determine from there.
Did you have something to add, Lieutenant Sawchenko?
Yes, I think the ultimate goal was that not only will we ramp up the number of training times for law enforcement, that we also have VRT, veteran response training, 2-day extra course for those that have military experience, that have gone through CIT, and they take a 2-day extra training course on how to deal with veterans that are in crisis. That would be awesome for dispatchers as well, and 911 call takers if they have a crisis to deal with on the phone. Also, we want to ramp up the program, and follow-up training was always the idea. There are certain specialities that could be done, reference schools, for SROs and universities. And so there's a lot of desire to want to continue the training and continue follow-up training. The challenges are, it takes time and a lot of personnel and money to do a lot of that. But that's the plan.
Do we have any other questions? If not, then I don't want to hold you guys up anymore, because, time is very valuable to all of us. But I do want to say thank you so much for attending, and we really appreciate everything that you guys do, and we hope that this is something that we can continue in the future. And I don't know if any of our presenters have any closing remarks they want to make.
I just want to say thank you and have a good weekend.
All right, so yes, have a good weekend, everybody, and thanks for attending.